Good morning, and welcome to day 93 of F260 at First Baptist Meridian. Today we look at 1 Kings chapter 2 as we continue the story of David's family. And this passage is all about a new king and old consequences. Solomon is now the heir apparent to take over the kingdom of Israel from his father David. He will inherit a kingdom with peace on all sides from its enemies, with a good economy, and he will not have to contend for his throne the way that his father had to. And so the interesting thing is in the opening words of this chapter, you see David giving Solomon the one piece of advice that he needs to succeed. As the time approached for David to die, he ordered his son Solomon, "As for me, I am going the way of all of the earth." In other words, I'm about to die. "Be strong and be a man," sounds like God's words to Joshua, "and keep your obligation to the Lord, your God, to walk in his ways and to keep his statutes, commands, ordinances, and decrees. This is written in the law of Moses so that you will have success in everything you do and wherever you turn, and so that the Lord will fulfill his promise that he made to me. If your sons guard their way to walk faithfully before me with all their heart and all their soul, you will never fail to have a man sit on the throne of Israel." So David gives Solomon, this is so important, David gives Solomon the one piece of advice that he needed to succeed as king. It didn't have to do with military. It didn't have to do with great trade deals. It didn't have to do with building projects. He says, walk in the Lord's statutes, commands, ordinances, and decrees. Keep your obligation to the Lord, and you will have success. But just as importantly, even though David told Solomon the one thing he needed to do to succeed, he had already shown Solomon the one thing that he needed to do to fail. David was the king after God's own heart. He is the king against whom all other kings are measured. But David appeared to have one glaring character weakness, and it's embodied in Bathsheba. He went after women that he had no business dealing with. And you see this manifest all sorts of ways. You have the tension in chapter 1 and consequences in chapter 2 over who would be David's successor. Why? Because you have sons, Adonijah and Solomon, by two separate wives. You also have, going back to when the prophet Nathan confronted David over Bathsheba, and David had said from his own mouth, this man should pay 4 lambs for the lamb that he took. David has already lost Amnon, Absalom, his first baby with Bathsheba, and the 4th lamb he will lose, his 4th son, will be Adonijah, because Adonijah makes a request of Bathsheba that seems an awful lot like an action Absalom took. When Absalom was trying to oust David, he slept with the women who stayed behind when David left the throne. Look what Adonijah says to Bathsheba. The kingdom should have been mine, but God ended up giving it to Solomon. Let me take Abishag, who had comforted David in his latter days, as a wife. What is Adonijah probably doing? He's trying to make a play for the throne, and it ends up costing him his life. We will see the same error, the same flaw in Solomon himself. The first thing that we will hear about in Solomon's reign, even before his wisdom, even before he does anything well, builds a temple for the Lord, the very first thing Solomon will do as king is marry the daughter of Pharaoh. The whole story of God's people is a God who brings his people out of Egypt. And with one act, his first act as king, Solomon brings Egypt right back into the heart of God's people. David told Solomon the one thing that he needed to do to succeed, but he had already shown them the one thing that he needed to do to fail. And look at the very end of Solomon's reign, which we'll eventually read about in 1 Kings 11. What happens? By the end of Solomon's reign, he has multiplied the error of his father, and it turns his heart away from the Lord his God. In the beginning of Solomon's reign, you read in 1 Kings 3, now Solomon loved the Lord. In 1 Kings 11, you read, now Solomon loved many foreign women. And by the way, the daughter of Pharaoh is always singled out. And we'll talk more about that in chapters to come. But I can't get over that. When I read 1 Kings 2, David tells Solomon the one thing he needs to do to succeed. And it's not the things that we usually think of. It's not the content of leadership. It's the character of leadership, pursuing God and obeying God. But David had also already shown Solomon the one thing he needed to do to fail, and that ends up having tragic consequences, not only for the characters in this chapter, like Joab and Adonijah, but ultimately for Solomon and the kingdom of Israel itself. We'll look at this more in the days to come, so keep reading, keep reflecting, and keep responding, and I'll see you tomorrow. God bless.